Okay. started in a minute announcement. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be getting started in just a minute or two, so if you can please get your breakfast and take your seats. We'll be getting underway in just a moment.
Good morning, everyone. I know some folks are still grabbing food and saying hello to people, and we will have more time to chat. At the end, we won't kick you out immediately, so we do want to get started on our program. Thanks a lot. So welcome, everyone, to the Iowa Environmental Council's third annual Bright Ideas event. It's a pseudo breakfast brunch today, so thank you for coming. I'm Carrie Johansson. I'm the Energy Program Director with IEC, and we are so pleased to have you with us, whether you're joining us here or online or here in Des Moines at our satellite location in Iowa City. As we get started this morning, we want to thank our sponsors, hosts, and partners for today's event. The Big Apple Orchard, the Graham Group, Michael's Energy, SIPCO, and Integrated Power, Sandra and Stuart Feldstein, Craig and Betty Miller, Cyril and John Mandelbaum, the Energy Group, GWA Solar, Carrie and Dan Johansson, Green Penny Bank, PolicyWorks, West Bank, and David Osterberg. Finally, I want to thank our Energizer sponsor, ITC Midwest, and give them a chance here to say a few words.
In our increasingly electrified society, a resilient electric grid is more important than ever. ITC Midwest builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost renewable energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. ITC Midwest is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Thanks again to ITC Midwest and to all of our sponsors today. We also want to thank Big Grove Brewery in Iowa City for hosting our Eastern Iowa satellite location and IEC member organization Ross Street Roasting in Tama, Iowa, for providing the gifts you'll take with you today. The full bags of an exclusive IEC roast that are on the table over there, so please grab those as you're exiting today. And thanks to all of you here for joining us as well. We have a really excellent program prepared for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the work IEC has done in the last year. We're going to have an awards celebration, and we have some of the folks we're honoring here with us today, which is really exciting. And a really great interactive presentation that I'm very excited about with Dr. Destenie Nock, who will be joining us virtually this morning. Before we get started with our awards and keynote, we want to take a moment to celebrate some energy successes in Iowa over the past year. So this summer, IEC announced our intention for Iowa to be operating on 100% clean energy by 2035. Setting such a goal and doing our part locally and statewide in tandem with larger efforts nationally and globally will be key to addressing the most harmful impacts of climate change. In late 2020, after a long battle in front of the IUB, Alliant Energy announced they would be closing their Lansing coal plant in 2022. Yay! This was the direct result of IEC and our partners pushing Alliant to look at the economics of renewables compared to coal, and has also meant Alliant's recently announced planned investment in 400 megawatts of solar. This year, we sued the Iowa Utilities Board for failing to take the same hard look at Mid-American's generating fleet and determining whether all of their coal plants are economic and necessary. We're continuing to push for Mid-American to be accountable to customers, not just shareholders. IEC continues to grow our local relationships to offer balanced guidance to governments struggling with wind and solar siting questions. We have become a regionally recognized expert in this field, and our guidance is used across the state. IEC and 100% Iowa, our grassroots collaborative movement, we're proud to partner with other environmental and community groups to achieve a 24/7, 100% clean energy commitment by the city of Des Moines. Yay. Awesome. Several other cities, including Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, as well as Polk County, have adopted or are working on similar resolutions, thanks to the really great efforts by a lot of the folks in this room and around the state. So we're very excited to see that local energy and momentum building. As a nonpartisan coalition, we do this work in partnership with other environmental groups, community advocates and leaders, and supporters like you. This morning, we are so excited to celebrate important partners who make our work and the work of clean energy adoption in Iowa possible with our awards presentation. To our friends at Moxie Solar in North Liberty, Karine Stein of Moms Clean Air Force, Iowa, and the members of the Des Moines Citizen Task Force on Sustainability.
We've been headquartered in North Liberty, Iowa since the beginning. The beginning actually goes back to about 2008. At the time, the company was in energy efficiency, auditing, looking at how to be good to the planet and helping homeowners and businesses do just that. In that time, we offered solar as a solution, and was something that we could, help out if that were the appropriate course of action. And Moxie Solar has grown since I started with them as a company around the dining room table, 5 of us, to now a company with 3 major locations in the U.S., one in Iowa, Illinois, and also down in North Carolina, to having over 300 employees. In that time, we've been advocates of solar right there at the State House. legislatively helping to help push that agenda, get those tax credits in Iowa, keeping those going on net metering policies, those conversations happening statewide. People want to do good for the environment. They want to do good for themselves and for their communities. I think the biggest thing that we've done is to connect those dots, if you will, in not just these 3 states, but other states that we serve across the United States. We've taken our experiences and flexed somewhat into other parts of the country and really expanded what will be our energy future. Moxie is trying to pull off probably one of the biggest deals in manufacturing in the United States. We are attempting to create solar panels here, not just in the U.S., but in Iowa and in Johnson County. So that's our move right now. That's where we are headed in the future. Installing solar is always going to be in our blood and in our DNA. We are now wanting to push this envelope and bring that manufacturing component to the business model. As a company, it obviously will serve a lot of advantages for us, but as a reputation in the U.S. and across the world, having a U.S. company make solar panels again is a big deal. If you're going to lead the industry and be a part of the bigger conversation and really help to have some influence in how this conversation goes, that's where we have started to separate ourselves as a company in this industry across the country. We have been right alongside of you all at the State House legislatively, and not that you're just doing solar energy, you're doing so many more things to advocate for a healthier Iowa. So to be recognized in this way alongside of you is a privilege, due in part to how you are helping this state and to be just one of the many solutions that are out there to help Iowans, and to be recognized by you is a big deal for us, because this is work we do day in and day out. We don't do it for these awards or for these recognitions, but if we just so happen to do good for our local residents, businesses, economy, and state, alongside of an organization such as yours that is doing so much more and having a bigger impact, that's just a huge win for us.
I am Karin Stein. I'm the state organizer for Moms Clean Air Force, and it's a position I've held for a couple of years, over 2 years. Moms Clean Air Force got started in the eastern United States, but today has state organizers in at least half of the states around the country. And we have over, I'd say, almost 1.5 million members around the United States. And I was approached by Moms Clean Air Force. I'm Latin American. You wouldn't necessarily know that, but I am very involved with the Latino community in Iowa. And one of the things that Moms is really interested in, besides all the work that we do around the country on clean air and fighting against climate change, is reaching out to frontline communities. And of course, many Latinos and Latinas are in frontline communities. Our work, whatever we do, at the grassroots level or at the state level or national level, all is focused on our 2 primary missions, which is to fight to protect children from air pollution and to fight to protect everyone from the climate crisis. And so we work at a grassroots level, community level. We work through the media by doing interviews and op-eds, and we work at a national level by being in conversation with our elected officials on a very regular basis. I work directly on a regular basis by reaching out to our elected officials and reminding them that we must think of our children. They don't have a voice. We must be their voice. And any decision we make will affect them first and foremost. We have a wonderful mix of volunteers around Iowa, and they all have their own voices. So that's another way in which we do our work. to make people aware of air pollution and how that relates to climate change. And of course, energy generation is right in the middle of that. Energy drives everything. Anything we do, I have a light going on my face. I have a computer on. You and I are talking. I will drive to town when we're done here to run some errands. I will get on an airplane later this week. Winter is coming. I heat my home. The clothes I wear, absolutely everything in our lives runs on energy. So energy has to be at the center of what we think about, and we take it for granted. And it's time not to take energy for granted anymore. At the grassroots level, we cannot carry the effort for clean energy and clean air and working against climate change on our shoulders alone. That is unfair, and we've tried it, and it is too difficult. We need the support of government. But motivating people at the grassroots level is fundamental to lend support to these laws that we are seeking. The Iowa Environmental Council, Moms Clean Air Force, the Iowa Farmers Union, and so many other wonderful organizations who are active in Iowa provide all kinds of tools. At Moms Clean Air Force, for example, one simple thing that takes literally less than 2 minutes is to go to our website and sign some of the petitions. And as a Latina, I often underscore the importance of everybody being welcome to talk to me. We need to hear the stories of people who cannot advocate for themselves, either because they don't speak English or because maybe their migratory status has not been resolved yet. But they're still on the front lines, and their children certainly are. So talk to us. We are your voice. We can amplify your voice and sign those petitions. Anybody can do it. So you start at the ground by creating a relationship and building trust with community members. They need to get to know you as a climate advocate first before you can ask them to step in. And once they step in, it starts creating a habit. And that's what we're after. I just want you to know how honored I am. I did not expect this award at all. There are so many people doing such amazing work in Iowa. So I know I could have been completely not included, and that would have been fine, because for every one of me, there are 20 others deserving even this or more. But I'm profoundly honored, and thank you so much.
The task force really started forming back in the fall of 2015, right before the Paris Climate Conference in Paris, obviously. And a group that I belong to, the Interfaith Green Coalition, which is a coalition of green teams from a whole bunch of different churches, decided we needed to decide what are we going to do locally after the Paris climate conference occurred. And so a bunch of us got together and said, hey, we're going to form and we didn't know what to call ourselves, but we're going to form a group that's going to go to the city and work locally. And and we started meeting every other week, and we have met every other week now for 6 years.
Initially, Carolyn and the initial group went to the City Council on Earth Day and asked the City Council to do two things. They asked the City Council to create a climate action plan and to reestablish a formal resident-led sustainability committee. And the Sustainability Committee, the council voted to include that in their strategic plan. That's how we became partners with the city.
The grassroots movement with this task force is probably one of the main reasons it's been so successful, because when we have gone to the city council meetings with a large group of people in support of something that they're thinking about passing, we are in a coalition with church groups, we're in college groups, environmental groups, neighborhood associations, all kinds of groups, even like Sheila mentioned, that that come together for the movement of some local action. So it's just not the task force. It really is a grassroots group in the community that's that we're kind of leading on.
We've got a really good track record, I would say. We've accomplished at least one major thing every year since we've been working together, starting 5 years ago. The first thing we got done was in collaboration with folks at UNI, and that was a greenhouse gas inventory for Des Moines. That gave us a baseline of the amount of emissions created within our jurisdiction. It also showed us what segments were good targets for taking action first, for prioritizing. That then led into working on one of our next successes, which was the benchmarking ordinance, where we got the city to pass a resolution and created a system for the largest buildings in our city that are 25,000 square feet and above. Looking at those first and start every year entering their energy and water use, right? And then over time, looking at who is operating efficiently, who is not maybe so efficient. That allows the city to more efficiently target resources. The third year, we got the city to hire Jeremy Karen, a sustainability manager. We had done quite a bit of looking at what other cities were doing for their climate and action plans, and we saw a big distinction between cities that had a sustainability manager and cities that did not have any staff. Following that, we were critical to the success of passing the 100% 24/7 clean energy resolution that the city agreed to. And so now we are working on an actual climate action and adaptation plan. And the city has taken RFPs, requests for proposals, and are in the process of coming down to the last couple of those. And then the actual writing of the plan, which will have action steps and will, be enshrined with an equity principle and, all kinds of things.
The climate action plan has been one of our biggest goals as a task force, like the goal since, its inception. And I started in August of 2017, but I knew that, from the information that Carolyn and Carrie and, Sheila passed down, this has been the biggest goal. And a lot of it is about consolidating the efforts that are already happening into one place and then concentrating the efforts that we want to put forward in that same place and using one intentional document with an equity lens and a lens moving forward with Des Moines and its relationship with its environment.
We've developed a toolkit that kind of talks about how to do this. And then Allison Van Pelt with the Des Moines Area MPO has been developing a number of resources for communities as well. But the bottom line is just do it. Figure out what it is that's important. Look at what the goals the city already has and the goals that you have, and move forward. Start building relationships because it's possible. On behalf of the task force, that we really appreciate this award. It feels great. It took me by surprise. We were absolutely thrilled to get it. So thank you very much.
And because not all of our award winners were able to be here, we wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to speak. But I did want to recognize our Sustainability Task Force members who are here. Would you guys mind standing up and we can give you an in-person round of applause. You've done fantastic work. It's been wonderful partnering with you, and we really look forward to continuing that relationship. So thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Destenie Nock to begin our presentation today. Dr. Nock, sorry, I was just making sure we're good, okay. Technology. Dr. Nock is the Assistant Professor of Engineering and Public Policy and Civil and Environmental Engineering with Carnegie Mellon University. In her role as the Director of the Energy, Equity, and Sustainability Group, she leads a team of researchers at the intersection of social justice, energy analysis, and systems modeling. The energy justice side of her team is developing novel metrics for identifying those experiencing energy poverty and insecurity, and optimization models for designing a more equitable power system. The systems modeling side of her group is developing electricity and transportation optimization and simulation models, which investigate how decarbonization and sustainable energy transitions impact vulnerable and marginalized communities. Beyond her applied research program, Dr. Nock consults with industry and government agencies in areas of energy justice, energy analysis, decarbonization, systems modeling, decision analysis, and the development and review of technical proposals. Part of Dr. Nock's presentation today will include an interactive component. So as a reminder, if you've not already downloaded and installed Google Sheets, please do so now. There are instructions on your table. We hope people can pull out their devices and participate in this interactive presentation with Dr. Nock. And that would include our attendees in Iowa City and folks online as well. Everybody should be able to participate. We'll see how this goes, but I think it's going to be fun. Now I am very excited and honored to turn things over to our guest speaker today. Welcome, Dr. Nock.
Awesome, and thank you so much for having me. I just want to let you guys know that it should be Google Slides, not Google Sheets. That's going to be a little bit important, so you guys aren't on the wrong technology. And today we are going to be talking about how to ensure that an equitable transition makes it into our clean energy transition. And one of the things that I have worked on a lot is trying to tie different energy analyses to energy justice and social justice, because at the end of the day, all of these technologies were created to impact people. So one fun fact though, my start in sustainability actually started in Iowa for a summer research internship at Iowa State. And if you don't know the logo, I'm wearing the Iowa State hoodie in this picture. And I was investigating the impact of increasing wind energy deployment on the power system. And so we were asking, as we are reaching 40% penetration of wind, what exactly is going to happen to our technology system, right, to the power grid? And one thing that I left with, though, was that understanding that the grid is a lot bigger than just the wind turbines, because the sustainability of it really depended on the mix. So this is our first interactive component, and the link for the Google Slides is right here on your screen. So you'll see that it's the tinyurl.com, and hopefully one of the program leaders can post that in the chat, because I can't see the chat right now. And my question here is, which combination is the most sustainable? So in option 1, we have a power grid that is a mix of coal plants, hydro plants, and solar. And then on option 2, we have a power system that is a mix of coal plants, hydro, and wind. So if we are going to go to our interactive portion, and whoops, you guys should actually be coming onto this slide here. Let's see, I don't see anybody on it. So that might mean that you guys need the link again. So let's make sure we're sharing that. Okay, so if you see this link, then that's the tinyurl.com. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, and I will also post it in the chat for you all. To everyone. There we go. Okay, so let's see. Oh, great. Awesome. Okay, don't really freak out. Everybody's on the slides. So what you guys should be able to, so I see all the anonymous animals up here, and you should be able to drag an X to your choice, right? So that's how we're going to do this interactive voting, since I would love to know what you guys are thinking. Now, if anybody is worried about, us knowing how you're voting, I want to assure you that all I can see up here are anonymous animals. So we have no idea who you are or who is moving the X's. For example, I see an anonymous coyote on the screen. So let's make sure that we vote, right? Because that's what we care about when we're thinking about equity, is inclusion of voices, right? So right now, for all the people that have voted, it looks like solar is winning. Okay, now this is what I expected from Iowa. Now we have wind kind of battling it out. Bum, bum, bum. Do, do, do. Okay, now we're neck and neck. I know you guys are like, oh my goodness. It's so intense, right? We're 3 and 3. 3 and 3, although I do see a lot of animals, and I see some animals are stuck on slide 1 and some had moved ahead to slide 3. But if you're in slide 2, let's see. So it looks like we have a pretty even split between everyone, but somebody has made their X very large to say wind should definitely win. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So slide 3. I don't know where that X is going. So we go to slide 3. Now the question is, which combination do you believe is the most equitable, right? So in slide 2, we were having the most sustainable, but now in slide 3, I'm asking you to vote on which one do you think is the most equitable. And so again, for option 1, we have a coal plant, a hydro plant, and a solar farm. So you can assume it's 33% coal, 33% hydro, 33% solar. And option 2 is a system that is 33% coal, 33% hydro, and 33% wind. And it seems like in this slide, for our representative decision makers, I guess these would be our elected officials because they're the ones with the technology access. We are seeing that solar has pulled through in terms of being voted the most equitable from all the people that were able to access the Google Slides. So then if we go to slide 4, then I guess the next question is, well, what are you actually meaning when you say equitable, right? So that's a big question because we all want an equitable system, but we may be thinking of different things. And so here, my question is, what is the biggest challenge for reaching energy justice? And the first one is no access to electricity in developing countries. 1 is non-inclusive decision-making. 3 is inability to afford electricity. 4 is places with a lot of power outages. 5 is needing better technology development and government programs. And then 6 is people's inability to keep a comfortable or safe indoor temperature. Let's see, and while we're waiting for people to come in on the voting, I will give you some brief background on why I chose some of these things. So typically for the no access to electricity in developing countries, this is what people think of when they hear about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7 for reaching universal access. This non-inclusive decision-making, this non-inclusive decision-making is often what people think of when they hear about the process not being equitable. So for example, in our in this example itself, the inclusive decision-making or the inclusive voting would be, did I give everyone access to the technology? Does everybody's smartphone work? Did everybody have Google Slides downloaded on their phone? Inability to afford electricity is typically what people use to evaluate whether or not people should qualify for these energy assistance programs. So for example, LAHEAP, the Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, that's based on income. And so that has a lot to do with your ability to afford. Places with a lot of power outages, right? That's when we think of Texas. Needing better technology development and government programs, that might be the management of the system or in research and development. And then people's inability to keep a comfortable indoor temperature has to do with extreme weather events, kind of ties with power outages. But even in normal conditions, sometimes people are not able to keep a comfortable indoor temperature. Okay, so now that we have all the people who have access to the technology to be able to vote, we see that we're in this upper quadrant a lot, which actually makes sense because that's where the media tends to focus as well. And a lot of the research has focused on energy burden and energy justice. Again, the universal access target, inclusive decision-making and ability to afford electricity. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So when we are thinking about the different technology options for the most sustainable and for the most equitable, one of the things that I would hope that you would take away is that it really depends on what you mean by equality and what you mean by sustainability. For example, when I was in Massachusetts, people were really gung-ho about greenhouse gas emissions, but then when we talk to people in California, they're really concerned with droughts, right? And often we are so quick to jump to equity and equality metrics for the specific technologies, but we really need to define the overall goal first, because every technology has its inherent challenges. So for example, with solar, often we're thinking about scalability and variability and unequal adoption rates. And that has a lot to do with actual resource inequality in a region, meaning like how is home ownership, shared across the city, has nothing actually really to do with the solar technology itself, but more about, our low-income communities able to own their homes and change the infrastructure of their house. Then of course, with coal and natural gas, we think about air pollution and the distribution of air pollution. And then with hydro, we're concerned with water use, right? And the distribution of the impacts of increasing our water use. And so when you are thinking about trying to not only do a sustainable energy system, but also an equitable energy system, one of the things I want to challenge you is to make sure that you guys are all on the same page about your definitions. So let's do some definitions. And here I'm going to be doing definitions in terms of the tools to reaching an equitable or sustainable system. So first, if we think about, well, what is inequality? It would be unequal access to opportunity. And here we see that one child is able to get an apple and the other child, for some reason, the apples are not falling. And then equality in terms of the tools is evenly distributed tools and assistance, meaning that we would just give the same amount of assistance to everyone, regardless of how much they needed it, right? And so here we see that achieving equality in terms of the tools, which is the ladder in this case, allows one child who already had the apple to get even more apples in his pouch, whereas the other child is still like, okay, I worked so hard and I've gotten so much closer to the tree, but I'm just not able to get those apples. And then equity is custom tools that address different inequalities. And so here we see that the shorter child who already had the apples still gets their ladder so they can pick apples too. And then the child who couldn't previously reach those apples has been given a larger ladder. And, oftentimes this is where, that equality versus equity debate comes in, because with these ladders here, we would actually, if this was in real society, oftentimes people sometimes look at that person with the larger ladder and say, well, why couldn't I have as much assistance too? I worked very hard. And that's one thing that's really challenging with equity is depending on where you start, it may view that the assistance is not an equality assistance, and not everybody has the same level of access. And then the ultimate goal, of course, is justice. And that's fixing the actual problems of the system so that we can offer equal access to tools and opportunities. And so this is the ultimate goal, where here we see not only is the tree fixed so it's not leaning anymore, but now even if we have equality of tools, everyone can access the opportunities of the system, which in this case are reaching apples. And so with kind of finishing out our goals, reaching equity and justice of the system should lead to equality of opportunity for the ultimate social objectives tied to our energy system, which are clean air and clean water, right? And so with equitable access to energy assistance, right, tying this back to energy, should also lead to equal access of affordable bills as well as the clean water and the clean air, which is a lot of what the discussion for energy justice has focused on. So a large question is, well, how do national and state energy transitions trickle down to the people, right? And that presents a large challenge of having to connect these policies to the household level, right? And try to have a more forward-looking approach of, well, what might happen? And we need to kind of think about first, how do we even measure inequality and equity? Because that's going to affect our ability to predict how our policies will impact local populations. So let's talk about how energy poverty is typically calculated in the United States. So here is a map of the entire US, and the different colors are highlighting different census tracts, where the lightest color on this map represents a census tract with less than 6% of their annual income spent on their housing energy bills. And the darkest part of the map represents the census tract that's on average spend more than 19% of their household income on covering their energy bills. So energy burden is the most common metric throughout the developed world, especially in the US. But the challenge is we know that energy burden is really that core of energy poverty. If you go one step out, you'll have energy insecurity, which is what we're thinking of when we hear about reliability and outage risks. And at the larger bubble, it's energy poverty, which deals with supply concerns, plus insecurity, plus energy burden. Okay, so for your last interactive part of this talk, my question is, have you ever felt like this in your household, where you may see your neighbor enjoying a very nice, in the winter, sorry, keep in mind that this is for the winter. So you might see your neighbor who's super comfortable in their house. It looks like summer in their house, but you are freezing and you just feel like you can't get warm no matter how much of your energy bill you are covering with your income. So let's go to Google Slides. And we'll be on slide 5. So the question is, in the winter, have you ever kept your house colder than you would have liked to save money? And if so, how often? So we have all the time, sometimes, rarely, and never. And I know that there's a lot of working people in the audience. So if you need to think about back to college, right? Maybe when you're a little broke, that would also be okay. Just have you ever experienced this in your life? So we have one giant X that couldn't make up their mind. They're like, I think that I may have, but I also may not have. I'm just going to cover all my bases so I don't get it wrong, right? And we see that for most of the people, we are seeing a sometimes, and even now, some people feel like they're doing this all of the time, which we know people may have become more aware of this, especially during the stay-at-home orders and the work-from-home orders during the COVID pandemic. So thank you to our representative decision makers for participating in this quick, brief, informal survey. So it looks like, again, most people are in this sometimes all the time category. And one of the things that we are highlighting in our work is that you all who have experienced this may have actually been experiencing a form of energy insecurity, but that is not recognized by the government right now. And so we know that the energy transition will impact people's behavior. So I know that we had a few people in that never column, so we're just going to make sure that you're on the same page as the rest of us who have experienced doing this in the winter. So let's assume that we have a household with an income of about $30,000 and they spend 5% of their disposable income on meeting their energy needs. But for the traditional energy burden measure of do you spend more than 10% of your income covering your energy bills, they would be defined as not energy poor. And then we have a second household that has an income of $100,000 a year. And they also spend 5% of their disposable income on meeting their energy needs. But again, they are also defined as not energy poor. And so one of the key challenges with the way that we currently measure energy burden and energy poverty is that it misses human behavior and people's tendency to reduce energy consumption to save money. And I think that one big takeaway here is that we are assuming that people will go into debt to cover their energy bills when actually the opposite is true. People experiencing poverty, whether it be financial poverty or energy poverty, are super smart, way smarter than we give them credit for. And they're going to do everything in their power to try to minimize the total cost of everything that they deem not essential, which sometimes leads energy and heating and air conditioning to fall into that category. So let's test this hypothesis. And we looked at Arizona, and we were working with a utility company down there, and their climate is long, extremely hot summers and mild winters. So we are going to be starting with the air conditioning sector and the cooling sector. Now, I promise not to overwhelm you guys with equations, but you know I'm an academic, so I gotta at least tell you my research process. So first we gather household utility level data, and we match that to a demographic survey. And this is going to tell us where people live, what types of houses they're in, how many people are in that household, what's their income, and other things like that. Then we also gather local temperature data so that we can know how much energy they're using at different temperatures and how that energy usage changes over time. We then calculate the household inflection temperature, which I'm going to explain on the next slide, so stay tuned. And then we are going to calculate the energy equity gap from there. So, question on everybody's minds, what on earth is the inflection temperature, right? And so we are defining that as the temperature at which a household shifts from heating to cooling, labeled by this convenient dotted line. So for a cooling inflection temperature here, and on the x-axis, we have the daily mean outdoor temperature in Fahrenheit, and on the y-axis, we have the daily electricity consumption in kilowatt hours. So that blue dotted line again is the temperature at which a household would be willing to turn on their air conditioning unit in the summer. So then with our assumption though, we would assume that low-income households would wait longer to turn on their air conditioning units because they are trying to save money in the summer. And so if we had a low-income household, we would assume that it would show up like this gray graph right here. And then this distance highlighted by that red arrow, double arrow at the bottom, would represent the cooling inflection temperature gap between high and low income homes, which we would then call the energy equity gap. And when we ran this for 6,000 households throughout Arizona, we actually found that this was true. What? Oh my goodness, total shocker. So here I'm showing you a graph of the inflection temperatures on the y-axis. And again, that's when a household would be willing to turn on their air conditioning unit. The income group is on the x-axis, where the income group 1 is households that make less than $15,000 a year, and income group 8 are households that make more than $150,000 a year. And the energy equity gap is calculated as the maximum of the median inflection temperatures subtracted from the minimum of the median inflection temperatures, which here are highlighted in those red boxes. And we see in group 1, that's 68.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and group 8 is 62.9 degrees Fahrenheit. And what I want to remind you of is that these are average temperatures for the day. So even though it says 68 degrees in Arizona, the high of the day may have actually been 95 or 98 degrees, but those nighttime temperatures are going to kind of mute that peak temperature there. And so between the highest and lowest income groups, we actually see a 6-degree difference in just the median inflection temperatures. And so that means that if some households are even waiting until it's 70 or 80 degrees to turn on their air conditioning units, then a low income group might be waiting until it's maybe 80, 85 degrees to turn it on. And we see that this trend persists throughout all of the years within our analysis. Now, the challenge is that during COVID, when people, this is for 2015, by the way, so this is before the time period when we're all stuck in our houses. And during COVID, extreme weather events could have actually made this worse, right? And so, for example, with the August 10th, 2020 derecho thunderstorm, when it slammed the Corn Belt, right? Some of you guys may have hit a little close to home. And high winds led to over 133,000 people losing power and suffering severe damage. And even if your house wasn't hit by the high winds of the thunderstorm, but your, power may have gone out, we know that if you do not have a lot of insulation in your home, then you were more likely to experience, extreme weather. So if it was very hot right after that thunderstorm, then that would be a big challenge. But also if this thunderstorm had happened during the winter, for example, then there would be other concerns similar to the February Texas disaster, where we might worry about freezing pipes and people falling victim to hypothermia because they feel like they can't afford it. And then, of course, even without the extreme weather events, this energy limiting behavior has been complicated by the pandemic. And so here I'm showing you the percent change in daily average hourly electricity consumption due to the implementation of school closures and restricted business operations by different demographic groups. So at the very top, we have the overall, just entire sample. And then the next level down is low income, middle income, high income. And at the bottom, we have the difference between our white and minority populations. The orange represents the Arizona, and the blue represents Illinois. So here we see that if we just looked at the overall case, we see a 4 to 6% increase in residential electricity consumption. But if we looked specifically just at a demographic group, for example, and let's assume that we're just going to look at Arizona, which is that orange, then we see large differences between white and minority populations, which means that this could lead to a lot of different effects should those prices change as we are deploying more technologies during energy transition. And one reason for this large difference between the white and minority populations is that in Arizona, there is a large percent of the population using electricity for cooling and heating, whereas in Illinois, we don't see these differences because a large part of the population is using natural gas for that heating sector, and we do not have natural gas consumption data within our data set. And these changes, though, most likely stem from income changes. And so here is a Sankey diagram of how different income groups within our sample shifted. And so less income is at the top. And what we see is that before the pandemic, which is on the left-hand side, we had a decent amount of people in the $35,000 and below category. But as we shifted during the pandemic, we see a lot of people shift into this unemployment category, where before the pandemic, unemployment in our sample was about 13%, but during the pandemic, we see it rise to 19%. And that is going to be a large problem with allowing people to cover their energy bills. So in conclusion, sustainability and just transitions are about those trade-offs, but also about integrating people's behavior into our energy analyses. And we see that key trends in energy poverty and energy insecurity across the United States are that there's more energy limiting behavior due to income changes, and modeling can be used to help identify forms of energy poverty, which is crucial to reducing energy poverty as we are moving forward with this transition. So of course, I want to leave you with some questions to think about after this presentation. So the first one is, how can we try to ensure that a sustainable transition is also an equitable transition? And how can we make sure that we are trying to identify winners and losers, in advance before we actually build out this entire system? And then the second question is, what groups may we be missing in the current way that we identify energy poor households, and how can we capture those households? So for example, the energy assistance measure energy burden that I talked to you about at the beginning of this presentation is typically based on gross income. But one challenge that we know of is that some households, especially low and moderate income, may spend 80 to 90% of their income on rent. So that disposable income, or their gross income minus their rent, may actually reveal who is really experiencing energy poverty, because we know that if a large portion of that income is taken for rent, they're most likely not going to be able to spend it on covering their energy bills. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you guys are having a wonderful conference.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nock. I know you've got a lot of wheels turning in my head. I found that very educational. And we want to open the floor for questions. What I'm going to try to do is bring the microphone around to you if you have a question. If you speak into the mic, Dr. Nock will be able to hear you. If you're here in Des Moines, raise your hand and I will do that. If you are in Iowa City or joining us virtually, you can enter your question in the YouTube chat on the right side of your viewing window, or email a question to iecmail@iaenvironment.org. And Angelisa, I'm counting on you to flag me down if we have virtual questions that way. Any questions out there for Dr. Nock?
Thank you, Carrie. Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila. And my question for Dr. Nock is, did you look at all into, I know at the end here you talked a little bit about renters. I know, and in Des Moines, a lot of our rental properties are probably, you know, the least well-maintained properties as compared to like owner-occupied properties. And I'm just wondering if you looked at all into how rental properties are inefficient, have old and inefficient appliances, and how that also contributes to like a larger need for energy, and whether these efficiency, what do I want to call them? Detriments or efficiency negativities are impacting people who are energy poor.
So thank you very much for that. And I do want to acknowledge that we did include some of the other metrics for identifying like housing characteristics in our study, but we don't have some of the information that you mentioned, such as, you know, the energy efficient appliances, as well as the level of insulation. We do have information on the household age, but when we calculate the inflection temperature, that is just for one household. So anything that stays consistent across the entire regression is going to be zeroed out, and that's not actually going to impact the temperature at which a household turns on their cooling system. So I think that that's inherent in the way that the households are using energy. So one of the other things that we did notice is that low-income groups, when you control for household size, they have a much flatter curve of the energy usage, meaning that they, even once they start using it, they just aren't able to use as much as those high income groups, which can be a very big challenge, especially since climate change adaptation, for climate change adaptation and heat concerns, the air conditioning unit is the main way that people would adapt to those high heat temperatures. So in summary, we did consider including some of those other variables that you mentioned. Now we are limited by the information that the utility is willing to share with us and survey their customers on. So some of the things that we had, again, were whether or not they had a smart appliance. It's just a yes or a no. the household age. That gives us some indication of insulation, but we don't know if there has been any updates to the house since it was built, and that was information that we did not have. And even so, when we look at the inflection temperatures and how that changes across different income groups, we did see that the low income population, one, has higher inflection temperatures, but two, even when they're willing to turn it on, they're just consuming less electricity when you control for household size.
Hello, Dr. Nock. This is from, this actually will probably feed off what you were just talking about, but we have a virtual question. And this person wanted to know where you're getting the demographic data for the trends. Are those from the energy providers, or where are you getting that demographic data?
So for Arizona, the demographic data comes directly from the energy provider. They did a survey for all of their customers with smart meters, and they provided that with us. So we have demographic data straight at the household level. In Illinois, we did not have demographic data from the utility provider, but what we did was we were able to tie each of the households to a zip code +4 level. And then we can estimate some of the different demographics from there. So we were looking at, if an area was more than 70% reported white at this zip code +4 level, then we identified it as a non-minority zip code area. Whereas if it had more than 70% like Black population, for example, we identified that as like a Black census tract area. And then we also did the same for our income measures when looking at these zip code +4 areas.
Hello, Destiny. This is Chuck Eisenhardt. I'm a state legislator from Dubuque, and I'm looking at the pictorial you put up earlier on inequality, equality, equity, justice. I'm wondering what you are doing, or maybe colleagues are doing, who are engaged in research in this space, to translate your findings into policy recommendations that would move the needle from inequality toward justice.
So I think that one of the big things that we're doing in my group is creating an optimization model that can identify where you're going to be seeing some winners and losers in the energy transition. So we are in the most prime time for fixing the system, right? Like, you're getting a lot more investment in energy. People are trying to build different renewable energy technologies. We're retiring a couple of power plants, right? We're thinking about building out our transmission system. And so one of the biggest things that that I'm trying to do for policymakers is try to help them think about how do we include equity and equality before the system is finished being built. Because the most easiest way to reach energy justice is to build a system where justice is ingrained into that system. And we're not seeing, for example, low-income groups having the highest levels of air pollution emissions. When we're thinking about decarbonizing, are we decarbonizing equitably? So, for example, in one of my other research projects, we tie a national level energy planning model with a people impact assessment model that we created. And we were able to show that when you are looking at these different decarbonization scenarios and you do not include equity at the beginning, then you see, not surprisingly, that the lowest income groups continue to have the highest per capita emissions throughout the entire energy transition planning horizon. But if you were actually to include for example, an objective function that said, as we retire plants, we need to do it equitably, meaning that, if you're getting a 10% reduction in air pollution emissions, but region B has a 50% higher air pollution emissions than you do, then now the next place that we're going to reduce first is going to be in region B. And we're going to do that before we retire plants in region A again. And we're going to keep getting people all to the same level. So that's one way to do it. Another way is also looking at the different ways that we measure energy poverty and energy justice. Because as I mentioned, if we are solely thinking about energy burden based on gross income, then that doesn't account for the renter population that's spending a large percent of their income on covering just their rent. And that is going to leave people out of this energy assistance programming. But also we need to consider energy limiting behavior, because what we found was that when we used our measure to identify energy insecurity and the energy burden measure, those groups didn't actually overlap, because those that are spending a large proportion of their income to cover their energy bills are going to be very different from the population that is lowering the temperature in their house to unsafe levels. For example, when I lived in Massachusetts during grad school, making about 30 grand and at one point 20 grand a year, we used to cut off our heat when we went to school, until one day I read that your pipes could freeze and that's going to cost you thousands of dollars. And so then we started using space heaters, which again are inherently unsafe. We know that that causes fires, but people are constantly weighing these risks, these long-term risks and short-term risks, to try to cover their energy bills. And I think that having more voices at the table could help us identify ways that people currently experiencing poverty are being missed. For example, with disconnections and evictions, and how that's disproportionately distributed across the population. And then thinking about how, transitions like transitioning away from natural gas infrastructure is going to impact it. So one of the things that I'm doing right now is I am consulting for the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts, because they're thinking about how can we decarbonize our natural gas sector equitably, and what are some risks to different populations because of that. So one of the things that they said that they liked that I brought to the table, which, sometimes this is just the way I think, so it's good to get feedback, is I think that there are structural inequities. So that's going to be, do you own your home? Can you adopt the infrastructure that you need to kind of go towards this energy transition? For example, can you adopt a heat pump and get off of the natural gas sector yourself? And then there's non-structural inequities, meaning that if you don't own your home, then you just can't change without your landlord's permission, right? And that's kind of inequities in the decision-making process. And those two different people are going to require two different solutions to shift away from natural gas. So in the first one, where you actually own your home, then you may be incentivized to shift if the prices are increasing. For example, you're going to see your energy bill going up. You're going to say, I don't want to pay for that anymore. I have to switch off of the natural gas sector. But on the other side, if you can't change the infrastructure in your home, increasing gas prices doesn't actually incentivize people to shift, because the landlord does not pay that bill. And so then that's when you need a strict mandate to say, hey, if you want to stay up to code for your rental property, then you need to shift it away from natural gas. And in the situation where the region is going to completely decommission their natural gas sector. And so that's some of the things that I'm trying to help policymakers think about is, there are inequities, but they look very different for different populations. And how can we design policies that can get at both the structural inequities and the non-structural inequities?
We had a new ordinance that was just talked about here in Des Moines, trying to do something with the tax abatements and mandating that we have electric housing for any new construction coming on. And as you talk about with the rental system and some of the inequities that go on there, the developers here have said if we are mandated to do electric, we might have less affordable housing. And so I'm not sure if that's a false choice. If that's true, though, which do we focus on? A climate issue and making sure that we have electric, or a justice issue and make sure we have enough affordable housing?
Well, I think that affordable housing is a problem that has not even been solved right now. So I feel like one of the challenges is recognizing people's motives, right? Because the developers want to make a profit. I mean, that's what we have with the private housing sector. And we know that often homeowners get a lot more tax assistance than low-income groups do. And a good book, if you guys are looking for a great book on this, is called Evicted. At the end, he has a lot of policy recommendations about how to solve the affordable housing crisis in the United States. And he's done a lot of work on in Minnesota, for example, I believe. And so one thing is, though, I mean, developers, if they can pass the costs onto their consumers, they will. And I think that with this system, there's always going to be a challenge to reconcile the winners and the losers and how they are on opposite sides of the spectrum. And I don't think that decarbonization is going to be going away, but also those new builds for developers don't typically go to low-income families. So I think that the big challenge there is going to be looking at how can we incentivize people to upgrade the infrastructure of those homes for renter populations, particularly low-income populations, because we know that those are not typically the first tenants that developers want in their buildings. And that's a big challenge for this affordable housing problem. But also it leads us to this other question of, why should us requiring you to get your houses up to a standard where the heating is affordable, the electricity is affordable, but also the house has the infrastructure that it needs to consistently operate in the way that it was intended, right? As we are decarbonizing our system, why should that mean that we're now going to have a housing crisis? And so, again, that's a big challenge of this, public-private kind of lens of our housing system. And as somebody who owned their home but was a renter, I mean, the landlords, they pass a lot of costs on to the renters. And so I have my house now because I was so tired of my rent raising without any justification. And so I think that that affordable housing question is going to be a question regardless of, infrastructure problems. I'm sure in Des Moines, it's a large problem now. And I think the eviction lab at Princeton, I believe, is really good at kind of talking through this work.
Thank you, Dr. Nock. We had a question come in from Iowa City. The folks there were wondering, going back to your earlier slides where you were asking people to choose between the different options in terms of which were most sustainable, they're wanting to know, was there a right answer? Who was right and wrong in that?
So, fun fact, there is no right answer because everybody defines sustainability differently. So the true answer is that it depends. And so some of the things that I normally encourage people to ask are, well, it's not just about the technology, right? It's about how those technologies are interacting with each other. So in order to answer the question of which is the most sustainable, the first thing I would have had to do is ask you guys, what is your definition of sustainability? Is it land use, water use, greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matter emissions, local emissions, global emissions, jobs, for example? Is it sustainable costs that aren't going to increase? So you want the cheapest system, and that's the most sustainable from an economic perspective. So then once we had what everybody cared about, then I would actually need to estimate the resources in the area. So how are the wind speeds looking? How are the solar resources looking? What locations are you going to put it at? And how do those resources differ at those different locations? And then also, are we going to incorporate droughts for that hydro facility, right? What are the droughts looking like? What's the cost of all these different things? And those are some things that you would need to quantify. Is it sustainable at the total regional level? Then if you wanted to take those same systems and say, okay, now we want to know if it's the most equitable, then you would need to do that exact same thing, but look at how those where those technologies would be, what populations are next to those technologies. You're going to have to estimate how the air pollution emissions distribute across your region and where those emissions would settle, right? Which regions are going to be kind of losing their land and how is that distributed across? And also how are those jobs distributed across the region? So those are some ways that you would need to kind of think about for how to actually answer the question of which is the most sustainable and which is the most equitable.
So it depends.
Yes,
yes.
It depends.
Thank you so much. We also have a virtual question here from Chris Hoffman at Moxie. So based on your research, do you also see solutions that are working to address equity? At the consumer level, the policy level, at the product level, what are some things that you see that are maybe already in action working to really get to the heart of equity?
So I think at the consumer and the policy level, that's why we need things like LAHEAP, or the Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, and WAP, the Weatherization Assistance Program. I think that, right now, you can always say a program needs more funding, and I definitely believe that that's true, but I do think that that helps address some of the inequities that we're seeing. I would love to see those things tie more with, housing assistance, because typically if you're feeling poverty in one area, you're also experiencing it in another area. From a technology standpoint, thinking about how we can make, current infrastructure and incorporate solar panels is something I'm really excited to see coming up. So for example, I just saw a solar panel integrated window. So you can actually see through the window, but it actually can capture some solar radiation in there. I think that's a really great technology. And also thinking about how to have more modular technologies that are movable is going to be something that's going to be super important. So for example, like solid oxide fuel cells is going to be nice. I think the heat pumps and, how can we get people away from fossil fuel emitting technologies within their home infrastructure is going to be really important. I think that's also good for trying to insulate people against these price increases that we're seeing is going to be vital. And then there's a lot of talk about, decentralized modular microgrids for how to protect people from extreme weather events. Now, one of the things that I hope will start to happen is that we think about larger microgrids, not just at the household level, because one of the things for renter populations is that being able to share electricity across the community really does help reduce that burden of those high energy costs for people stuck on the grid. And there's also some conversations coming up about how do we actually design effective rates for electricity and energy use. So for example, a lot of people are starting to get solar panels on top of their roofs, but they stay connected to the transmission line infrastructure, which does benefit them because it provides a backup energy service if for example, their battery didn't hold enough electricity to get them through the day and it was dark. But right now, one of the ways that we pay for electricity, at least in Pennsylvania, is based on the number of electrons that you use, which is very challenging because one, now you're not paying as much for the transmission and distribution line infrastructure, even though those poles and wires are very valuable to you, no matter how much electricity you're using. And so then what happens is that those costs end up getting translated down to people that cannot shift or cannot adopt solar, which again is those renters populations, but also people in apartment complexes, right? So even some high income folks might have these challenges, right? If you're in a row home and you don't own your roof, then that's another big challenge there. So I think that this rate design is also going to be a key player in a good policy incentive for reaching an equitable energy transition.
Thank you, Dr. Nock. We really appreciate your being here with us today. I think that we're going to wrap that for questions, but thank you so much for your insightful presentation and for all the great questions and your responses.
Thank you for having me.
I was wondering if you would be able to just, as we're going to be closing here today, to just repeat the questions that you had asked us to think about. So as people are kind of mingling and leaving today and thinking about Dr. Nock's presentation, things I want you to leave with on the top of your mind to think about.
So the first one was, how can we make sure that a sustainable energy transition is also an equitable transition? Because one of the biggest challenges of reaching energy justice and social justice is designing a just and equitable system from the beginning. Then the second question was, what groups may we be missing in the current way that we identify energy poor households, and how can we try to capture those households? And the example I gave was that currently energy assistance is based on total household income, but we know that some households may spend 80 to 90% of their income on rent. And so if we use disposable income, which is gross income minus the rent, then this may reveal a different population of people who are at risk of energy poverty.
Thank you so much. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And if you are interested in learning more about Dr. Nock's extensive work, please read her guest post on IEC's blog for more information and a link to her blog where she has a lot of additional really great content. And thank you again. We're wrapping up today, so I really wanted to thank you again for joining us this morning. And we wanted again to thank our sponsors and partners for today's event that should be flashing on the screen in front of you right now. So thanks to all of those folks for contributing to our event today and to IEC's work. A couple of reminders. I wanted to remind you to definitely pick up your bag of Bright Start Clean Focus coffee from the table on your way out this morning. You can also grab an IEC branded clean canteen with a special donation this morning to keep your coffee fresh and hot all afternoon. And so now we're just going to invite people who are here in Des Moines to enjoy networking and conversation until our time wraps up today. I wanted to note that if you that you can get your parking validated as well up at the front desk where the staff is. So if you brought your parking stub in, we can validate that for you. Our guests in Iowa City are going to be invited to participate in a local discussion on clean energy. And for those of you attending virtually, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And we hope you have an energizing rest of your day. Thanks a lot.